Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Endeavour and watched the stars change colors around them. The ship had been traveling for 3 months toward the Proxima Centauri system, after Earth received strange signals from that direction. Jake was a tall man with brown hair and steady eyes who had spent 15 years exploring space for the Earth Alliance. He never expected to find what waited for them near the red dwarf star. The first officer, Commander Lisa Carter, walked up to Jake with her tablet in hand. Lisa was a smart woman who studied alien life forms, though she had never seen a real alien before today. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight and her green eyes showed both excitement and worry. She had been Earth's best scientist for understanding life on other worlds, even though no other life had been found until now. "Captain, the signals are getting stronger," Lisa said as she showed Jake the readings on her screen. "Whatever is sending them is big, really big. The computer thinks it might be a ship, but it's 10 times larger than anything we have ever built." Jake nodded and looked at the main screen where stars moved slowly past them. The Endeavour was Earth's newest and fastest ship, built with the best technology humans could make. It had taken them 40 years to develop engines that could travel between stars. Now they were about to meet someone who had been traveling the galaxy much longer than Earth had even known about space travel. Lieutenant Alex Bennett sat at his station running scans of the area ahead of them. Alex was a young man from Texas with black hair and smart eyes, who could read computer data faster than anyone else on the ship. He had joined the space program because he wanted to see what was out there beyond Earth. Now he was about to get his wish in a way he never imagined. "Captain, I'm picking up 3 ships," Alex said as his fingers moved across his controls. "They're not like anything in our databases. The shapes are weird and they're made of materials we don't recognize. They're also moving toward us but slowly, like they want to talk instead of fight." Jake felt his heart beat faster but kept his voice calm. This was the moment every human had wondered about, since they first looked up at the stars. Were they alone in the universe, or were there others out there among the distant suns? Today they would finally know the answer. "Reduce speed and send a basic greeting signal," Jake ordered. "Let them know we come in peace and want to communicate." The next few hours passed slowly as both sides sent signals back and forth. The alien ships were beautiful in a strange way, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to glow with their own light. They moved through space like they were swimming through water, instead of flying through emptiness. Finally, a message came through that the ship's computers could understand. The voice that spoke was not human, but the words were clear. It spoke in perfect English, which surprised everyone on the bridge. "Human vessel, you will follow us to the meeting point. The Galactic Council wishes to speak with representatives of Earth. Do not deviate from the course we provide or you will be destroyed." Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa had her mouth open in shock. Alex was staring at his screen like he could not believe what he was seeing. The other officers on the bridge all turned to look at their captain, waiting for his decision. "Send a reply," Jake said. "Tell them we agree to meet with the Galactic Council and we will follow their ships." 2 days later, the Endeavour arrived at what could only be called a space city. It was a massive structure floating in empty space between stars, with thousands of ships of different shapes and sizes docked to its many arms and platforms. Lights moved across its surface like rivers of stars, and Jake could see that it was much older and more advanced than anything Earth could build. The alien escort ships led them to a docking bay that was just the right size for the Endeavour. As soon as they were connected to the station, a group of beings came aboard their ship. Jake had seen pictures of what aliens might look like in movies and books, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. The leader of the group was tall and thin, with blue skin and 4 arms. Its head was larger than a human head and its eyes were completely black. When it spoke, Jake could hear the words in his mind as well as through his ears. "I am Ambassador Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire," the creature said. "The Galactic Council has been aware of your species for some time. We have been waiting to see if you would develop the ability to travel between stars. Now that you have, we must determine if Earth is ready to join the galactic community." Lisa stepped forward with a small device in her hand to record everything that happened. She had studied for years to prepare for this moment, learning everything she could about communication with alien species. But all her training felt useless now that she was face to face with real aliens. "We are honored to meet you," Jake said carefully. "Earth would be very interested in learning about other worlds and species. We come seeking knowledge and friendship." Ambassador Vexistar looked at Jake for a long moment with those strange black eyes. Then something happened that none of the humans expected. Jake felt a pressure in his mind, like something was trying to push its way into his thoughts. But instead of letting it in, his mind pushed back automatically. The feeling went away and Vextar stepped backward with what looked like surprise. "Interesting," the ambassador said, and Jake could hear confusion in its mental voice. "Very interesting indeed." The other aliens in the group moved closer to their leader and began speaking in their own language, which sounded like music mixed with static electricity. Jake could tell they were upset about something, but he did not know what. Lisa and Alex looked at him with questions in their eyes, but he had no answers to give them. Finally, Vextar spoke again. "Captain Morrison, you and your crew will come with us to meet the Council. They will want to examine you more closely before any decisions are made about Earth's future." Commander Sam Rodriguez had always been good at finding things that were supposed to stay hidden. She grew up in Arizona, where her father taught her to track animals through the desert and notice things that others missed. Now she was using those same skills to track secrets across the galaxy, and what she found would change everything for Earth and every other world in known space. 6 months had passed since Captain Jake Morrison first met the Galactic Council. Earth had been given observer status, which meant humans could watch council meetings but could not vote or speak unless asked. Most Earth leaders were happy with this arrangement because it gave them time to learn about galactic politics and technology. But Sam had noticed something wrong from the very beginning. She commanded a small stealth ship called the Shadow that was designed to go places without being seen. Her crew was made up of volunteers who wanted to explore the parts of the galaxy that the council said were empty or dangerous. Sam had brown hair that she kept short and gray eyes that missed nothing. She had been born to ask questions that others were afraid to ask. Her science officer was Dr. Ben Cooper, a man from Ohio who specialized in studying alien cultures. Ben had thick glasses and messy red hair and could speak 12 different alien languages. He had requested transfer to Sam's ship because he wanted to study the species that the council claimed were extinct. Something about the official records did not make sense to him. "Commander, I've been looking at the council's historical files again," Ben said as he sat down next to Sam in the ship's small meeting room. "According to their records, 47 different species have joined the council over the past 50,000 years. But here's the strange part. 31 of those species show no signs of independent government or military anymore. They exist only as council citizens with no separate identity." Sam looked at the data on Ben's tablet and felt that familiar feeling in her stomach that told her something was very wrong. She had learned to trust that feeling because it had kept her alive through many dangerous situations. "What happened to those species?" she asked. "The official story is that they chose to integrate fully into council society for the greater good," Ben replied. "But I've been talking to some of the younger members of these species, and many of them seem confused about their own history. They know they came from somewhere else originally, but they can't remember details about their homeworlds or their old way of life." Lieutenant Kate Phillips, their communications expert, entered the room carrying a cup of coffee and looking tired. Kate was a small woman with black hair who could intercept and decode almost any signal in the galaxy. She had been working for 3 days straight on a project that she said was very important. "Commander, you need to see this," Kate said as she activated the main screen. "I've been monitoring subspace communications across the Outer Rim territories. There are signals coming from systems that the Council says are uninhabited. Not only are there signals, but some of them are coming from species that are supposed to be extinct." The screen showed a map of the galaxy with thousands of points of light marking inhabited worlds. Most of the lights were clustered around the galactic center where the Council maintained its government. But there were also lights scattered throughout the Outer Rim, in places that Council maps showed as empty space. Sam stood up and walked closer to the screen. "How sure are you about this data?" "Very sure," Kate replied. "I've triple-checked everything. There are at least 200 inhabited systems in the Outer Rim that don't appear on any Council charts. Some of the signals are in languages that match extinct species in the Council database." Ben leaned forward in his chair and adjusted his glasses. "Commander, I think we need to go take a look at one of these hidden systems. If there really are survivors of supposedly extinct species out there, they might be able to tell us what really happened to their civilizations." Sam made her decision quickly, the way she always did when the situation was important. "Set course for the nearest signal source. And Kate, make sure we're running full stealth mode. If the Council doesn't want these systems on their maps, They probably don't want anyone visiting them either. 3 weeks later, the shadow emerged from hyperspace near a yellow star that the Council database listed as uninhabited. But as soon as they arrived, their sensors detected multiple space stations and thousands of ships moving between several planets. This was not an empty system at all. The beings who lived here called themselves the Free Worlds Alliance. They were made up of refugees and survivors from dozens of different species, all living together on worlds that were hidden from Council sensors by advanced technology. Their leader was a warrior named Grathmore, from a species called the Corvani. Grathmore was 8 feet tall with thick gray skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. His people had once been the Council's primary military force until they discovered what was really happening to species that joined the galactic government. When the Corvani tried to leave the Council, a war broke out that lasted for 200 years. The Corvani lost, and according to Council records, their entire species was destroyed in the final battle. But that was not true. Thousands of Corvani had escaped to the Outer Rim, along with survivors from many other species who had discovered the Council's dark secret. They had been hiding and building their strength for centuries, waiting for the right moment to strike back against the galactic government that had enslaved their people. "Your species is very unusual," Grathmore told Sam as they met in his command center on the hidden world of Haven Prime. "The Council tried to control your minds, the same way they control all other species, but you resisted them without even knowing you were doing it. This has never happened before in the entire history of the galaxy." Dr. Ben Cooper was busy interviewing refugees from different species, recording their stories about what had happened to their civilizations. The pattern was always the same. A species would develop space travel and make contact with the Council. They would be offered membership and advanced technology. But over time, their leaders would start making decisions that didn't make sense, always favoring Council interests over their own people's needs. "It's mind control," Ben explained to Sam later that day. "The Zephyrians have psychic abilities that let them influence the thoughts and decisions of other species. They use this power to slowly take over every government that joins the Council. Within a few generations, the conquered species forget they were ever independent." Kate had been working with the Alliance's technical experts to understand how the hidden world stayed concealed from Council sensors. The technology was based on quantum field manipulation, something that human science was just beginning to understand. But what impressed her most was how all these different species had learned to work together, without any central authority controlling their thoughts. "Commander, this changes everything," Kate said as they prepared to return to Earth. "If humans really are immune to Zephyrian mind control, we might be the key to freeing all these enslaved species. But that also means the Council will see us as a threat once they figure out what we can do." Sam looked out at the bustling space stations of Haven Prime, where dozens of different alien species worked side by side as equals. This was what the galaxy could be if it was free from Zephyrian control. But she also knew that freedom would not come without a fight. "Prepare a full report for Earth Command," she ordered. "Include everything we've learned about the Free Worlds Alliance and the Council's mind control programs. Earth needs to know what we're really up against out here." As the shadow left the hidden system and headed back toward Earth, Sam couldn't stop thinking about Grathmore's final words to her. The old warrior had looked her in the eyes with something that might have been hope and said, "Your people may be the mind-free ones that our prophecy spoke of. If that is true, then the age of Zephyrian rule is finally coming to an end." President Karen Walsh stood in the Oval Office looking out at the Washington Monument as snow fell on the city below. It had been 3 months since Commander Sam Rodriguez returned from the Outer Rim, with proof that the Galactic Council was enslaving entire civilizations through mind control. Karen was a woman from California who had been elected because people trusted her to make hard decisions, but nothing in her political career had prepared her for this moment. The communication screen on her desk showed Ambassador Vexitar's blue face staring at her with those black eyes that seemed to look right through her. Behind him, Karen could see other Council members, including the insect-like Queen Zelthara and a being made of living crystal that called itself Resonant Prime. They had been waiting for her answer for almost an hour. "President Walsh, we have been very patient with your species," Vextar said, and Karen could hear the mental pressure in his voice trying to influence her thoughts. "But our patience is not unlimited. Earth must surrender all rebels who have made contact with terrorist groups in the Outer Rim, or face the consequences of defying the Council's authority. Karen felt the alien's psychic pressure pushing against her mind, trying to make her agree to his demands. But just like every other human, her brain pushed back automatically without her even thinking about it. She had learned from Dr. Ben Cooper's research that this mental resistance was something unique to humans, probably because Earth had evolved outside the Zephyrian sphere of influence. Ambassador Vextar, Earth cannot and will not surrender our people to you, Karen replied in a steady voice. Commander Rodriguez was conducting legitimate scientific research in unclaimed space. If the Council considers that a crime, then we have very different ideas about freedom and justice. The alien leader's expression changed to something that might have been anger or frustration. Behind him, the other council members began speaking in their strange musical language, and Karen could tell they were upset by her refusal to cooperate. Then Earth has chosen to stand against the authority that has maintained peace in this galaxy for 50,000 years, Vextar said. We will give you one final opportunity to reconsider. Submit to Council authority or be treated as enemies of galactic civilization. Karen ended the transmission without another word and immediately activated the secure line to Admiral Rick Stone at Space Command headquarters. Rick was a big man from Texas who had spent 30 years in Earth's Space Navy, working his way up from lieutenant to the highest military position in human space. He had been preparing for this moment ever since Sam Rodriguez's report reached Earth. Rick, they've made their ultimatum, Karen said when the Admiral's face appeared on her screen. How ready are our forces? Admiral Stone looked grim but determined. As ready as we can be, Madam President. We have 200 ships of various classes, with our newest vessels equipped with the PSI shield technology that Dr. Amy Foster developed based on human neural patterns. It's not much compared to what intelligence says the Council has, but our people are motivated and we have some advantages they don't know about. Dr. Amy Foster had been working around the clock since learning about Zephyrian mind control to develop technology that could protect other species from psychic manipulation. Amy was a brilliant woman from Boston who specialized in brain science and computer interfaces. Her psi shields created a field around a ship or person that blocked psychic influence, allowing enslaved species to think freely for the first time in generations. The war began exactly 1 week later, when a Zephyrian fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. Leading them was a massive command ship called the Mind's Eye, which projected psychic control fields that could dominate entire populations from thousands of miles away. But when they tried to use their mental powers on the human fleet that came out to meet them, nothing happened, Captain. Steve Parker commanded the destroyer Falcon in the first battle of what historians would later call the Zephyrian War. Steve was a young officer from Michigan who had joined the Space Navy because he wanted to protect Earth and its colonies. He had never expected to be fighting for the freedom of the entire galaxy, but that was exactly what he found himself doing as alien ships opened fire on his small fleet. All ships, this is Parker, he said over the communication system. Remember your training. They can't get into our heads like they do with other species, so use that advantage. Fight as individuals but support each other. Show them what humans can do when they're free to think for themselves. The battle at the Centauri Gateway lasted for 6 hours and ended with the Zephyrian fleet retreating in confusion. They had never faced an enemy that could resist their psychic coordination disruption tactics. Human ships fought with a flexibility and unpredictability that the aliens had never encountered before. Where other species relied on mental links that the Zephyrians could interfere with, humans used voice communication and individual initiative that proved devastatingly effective. News of the victory spread quickly through both human space and the hidden worlds of the Outer Rim. Species that had been enslaved for thousands of years suddenly began to remember what freedom felt like as human-built psi shields were distributed to Free Alliance worlds. Ancient civilizations that had forgotten their own histories started to wake up from the mental fog that had controlled them for centuries. General Matt Hayes commanded Earth's ground forces and was responsible for liberating worlds where the population had been completely dominated by Zephyrian mind control. Matt was a career soldier from Georgia who understood that this war would not be won by destroying enemy ships, but by freeing enemy minds. His troops carried portable PSI shield generators that could break psychic control over entire cities. The first liberated world was Corvin Prime, the original homeworld of Grathmore's people. When human Marines landed there and activated their PSI shields, millions of Corvani suddenly remembered that they had once been proud warriors instead of mindless council servants. The uprising that followed drove the Zephyrian occupiers off the planet in less than a day. Colonel Nick Davis led the most dangerous mission of the early war period. His Special Forces team was tasked with capturing a Zephyrian mindship intact so that human scientists could study their psychic technology. Nick was a small, quiet man from Montana, who specialized in impossible missions that other people said couldn't be done. The mindship Eternal, thought was one of 12 massive vessels that the Zephyrians used to project mind control across entire star systems. It was heavily defended and protected by layers of psychic barriers that could drive most beings insane just by getting close to them. But humans were immune to these mental defenses, allowing Nick's team to board the ship and fight their way to the control center. Intelligence officer Kate Phillips had transferred from Sam Rodriguez's exploration ship to work with the assault team. Her job was to crack the Zephyrian computer systems and download their files before the enemy could destroy them. Kate had learned to read alien computer languages by studying captured equipment, and she was the only human who could navigate Zephyrian data networks. What Kate found in the mindship's memory banks shocked everyone who read her report. The Zephyrians themselves had once been free people, but they had been conquered and enslaved by an even more ancient power that still existed somewhere in the galaxy's core. The mind control technology they used on other species had originally been used on them thousands of years ago. The Zephyrians are victims too, Kate explained to General Hayes during a briefing at Earth Command. They were enslaved so long ago that they don't even remember what it was like to think freely. The real enemy is something called the predecessors, and they're still out there controlling everything from behind the scenes. This revelation split the Zephyrian Empire as younger generations learned the truth about their own history. Many Zephyrian ships began defecting to the human-led coalition, bringing with them advanced technology and knowledge about the ancient enemy that had enslaved them. The war that had started as Earth versus the Galactic Council was becoming something much larger, a fight for the freedom of every thinking being in the galaxy. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the battleship Constitution as reports came in from across the galaxy. Entire sectors were throwing off Council control as SciFi shield technology spread to more and more worlds. The Free Alliance had grown from a few hidden systems to a massive coalition of liberated species, all working together under human leadership to end 50,000 years of mental slavery. But even as victories piled up, Admiral Stone knew that the real war was just beginning. The predecessors who had created this system of control were still out there, and they would not give up their galactic empire without a fight that would shake the stars themselves. Dr. Tony Martinez had always loved digging through ancient ruins to find secrets from the past. He grew up in New Mexico, where his grandmother taught him that every old stone and broken pot had a story to tell if you knew how to listen. Now he was listening to stories that were older than human civilization, and what he heard made him wish he had never learned to understand the language of the predecessors. Tony was part of an archaeological team working on Kethavara, a dead world near the galactic core that had once been the center of a mighty empire. The planet's cities had been abandoned for millions of years, but recent battles with Zephyrian forces had uncovered ruins that went much deeper than anyone expected. What Tony found beneath the surface would change how every species in the galaxy understood their own history. His partner on the dig was Dr. Helen Brooks, a woman from Oregon who specialized in ancient languages and symbols. Helen had brown hair that was always covered with dust from whatever ruin she was exploring, and green eyes that lit up whenever she decoded a new piece of ancient text. She had learned to read over 30 different alien writing systems, but the predecessor symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen. "Tony, you need to look at this," Helen called from inside a chamber they had discovered deep beneath the main temple complex. "These inscriptions are definitely predecessor, but they're not just historical records. They're instructions or maybe warnings about something, called the Final Protocol." Tony crawled through the narrow tunnel that led to Helen's chamber and found himself in a room covered with writing that seemed to glow with its own light. The symbols moved and changed as he watched them, as if they were alive and trying to communicate directly with his mind. But unlike other species, Tony's human brain could look at predecessor writing without being controlled by it. "What does it say?" he asked as Helen ran her scanner over the glowing text. "Near as I can translate, It's a manual for something called the consciousness web, Helen replied with excitement and fear mixed together in her voice. The predecessors didn't just control other species through psychic manipulation. They created a galaxy-wide network that connected every thinking mind to their central intelligence. Every thought, every decision, every dream was monitored and controlled from their core worlds. The more they translated, the more horrible the truth became. The predecessors were not a physical species at all, but beings of pure psychic energy who had existed since the galaxy was young. They had discovered that they could extend their own consciousness by taking control of other minds, essentially making every enslaved being into an extension of their own thoughts and will. Commander Janet Cole arrived on Kethvara 3 days later with a fleet of human and allied ships. Janet was a career officer from Virginia who had been promoted rapidly during the war because of her ability to coordinate multi-species operations. She had come to investigate reports that the predecessors were becoming active again after millions of years of hiding in the galactic core. Dr. Martinez, what exactly are we dealing with here? Janet asked as she reviewed the archaeological team's findings in their temporary command center. Tony looked up from his translation work with tired eyes. He had not slept much since discovering the predecessor archives because every time he closed his eyes, he could see the scope of what they were up against. Commander, the predecessors aren't just another alien species we can fight with ships and soldiers, Tony explained. They're entities made of living psychic energy who can exist in multiple dimensions at once. They created the entire system of galactic control as a way to feed on the mental energy of billions of enslaved minds. Helen activated a holographic display that showed what they had learned about predecessor technology. The Zephyrians and every other psychic species in the galaxy were created by the predecessors as biological tools for maintaining control. The psychic sensitivity that makes them vulnerable to mental manipulation was engineered into their genetics millions of years ago. Engineer Pete Johnson was working around the clock in his mobile laboratory, trying to develop new technology that could fight an enemy made of living thought. Pete was a practical man from Ohio who believed that every problem had a technical solution if you were smart enough to find it. But the predecessors challenged everything he thought he knew about science and engineering. Commander Cole, I think I have something, Pete said as he emerged from his lab looking exhausted but excited. If the predecessors are beings of pure psychic energy, then they need some kind of physical anchor points to maintain their presence in our dimension. Based on Dr. Martinez's translations, they use massive crystal formations hidden throughout the galactic core as focal points for their consciousness. The plan that emerged from their research was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was the only hope they had. The predecessors had remained hidden for millions of years because no species had ever been able to resist their mental control long enough to threaten their core worlds. But humans were different, and that difference might be enough to reach the heart of the ancient enemy's power. Admiral Rachel Brooks commanded the largest fleet in human history as it prepared to assault the galactic core. Rachel was a woman from Alaska who had joined the Space Navy because she wanted to explore the unknown regions beyond human space. Now she was leading an expedition to the most dangerous place in the galaxy, where beings older than stars waited to defend their eternal empire. The fleet included ships from every liberated species, all working together under human coordination. Former Zephyrian vessels flew alongside Corvin warships and Nexari technical support craft. It was the first truly free galactic fleet in the history of the galaxy, united not by mind control, but by the shared desire for freedom. As they approached the galactic core, strange things began to happen. Space itself seemed to bend and twist around massive structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human science could barely understand. The predecessor constructs were awakening after eons of sleep, responding to the threat that free minds posed to their control system. Captain Jim Watson commanded the scout ship Pathfinder as it probed ahead of the main fleet. Jim was a young officer from California who had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the fleet because someone had to map the defenses around the predecessor core worlds. What he found was beyond anything they had prepared for. Admiral Brooks, you need to see this, Jim reported over the communication system. The predecessors aren't just hiding in the galactic core. They are the galactic core. The entire region is one massive artificial construct designed to house their consciousness. We're not attacking a planet or a space station. We're attacking a living entity the size of a solar system. The first attacks came as waves of pure mental force that would have destroyed the minds of any other species. But human psi shields held firm, and the fleet pressed forward through psychic storms that tried to tear apart their thoughts and memories. Behind them, liberated worlds across the galaxy felt the predecessors stirring to full wakefulness for the first time in millions of years. Dr. Susan Brown had trained for months to become humanity's first psi-null operative, a person whose mind was so naturally resistant to psychic influence that she could operate in the heart of predecessor space without protection. Susan was a quiet woman from Vermont who had always been good at meditation and mental discipline. Now those skills were humanity's best hope for striking at the source of galactic slavery. "The plan is simple but insane," Susan explained to her team of volunteers as they prepared for their mission. "We're going to enter the predecessor consciousness network and plant quantum viruses based on human concepts of individual freedom and independent thought. If it works, the viruses will spread through their entire control system and awaken every enslaved mind in the galaxy." As the final battle began around the predecessor core worlds, Susan and her team prepared to enter a realm of living thought, where the normal laws of physics did not apply. They would be fighting not with weapons or technology, but with the power of human ideas about freedom and the right of every being to think for themselves. The fate of every species in the galaxy now depended on whether human concepts of liberty could survive in a realm where thoughts themselves were weapons and freedom was the most dangerous idea of all. Dr. Susan Brown stood at the edge of reality itself, preparing to enter a realm where thoughts had physical form and ideas could reshape the fabric of existence. The psychic dimension that housed the predecessor consciousness looked like a vast ocean of liquid starlight, with currents of pure thought flowing between islands of crystallized memory that stretched beyond the horizon of human understanding. Susan had trained for this moment her entire life without knowing it. Growing up in Vermont, she had always been the quiet girl who could focus her mind completely on whatever task was in front of her. Her teachers said she had unusual mental discipline for someone so young. Now that discipline was humanity's greatest weapon against an enemy that had controlled the galaxy for millions of years. Behind her, the volunteer team that would accompany her into the predecessor network made their final preparations. There was Captain Mike Turner, a pilot from Texas who had volunteered because he wanted to see what space looked like from inside a living mind. Engineer Lisa Hayes from Michigan had designed the quantum viruses they would plant in the alien consciousness system. Dr. Paul Davis from Florida would map the network structure so they could find the central control nodes. Remember, once we're inside their dimension, normal physics won't apply, Susan told her team as they activated the experimental translation device that would allow their consciousness to enter the psychic realm. "Your thoughts will have physical effects, so stay focused on our mission. Don't let the predecessors trick you into believing anything that isn't real." The translation process felt like falling upward through layers of dreams and nightmares. Susan found herself floating in a space that looked like the inside of a giant brain, with pathways of light connecting massive structures that pulsed with alien thought patterns. This was the consciousness web that had controlled every psychic species in the galaxy for eons beyond counting. The predecessors had been waiting for them. Ancient voices spoke directly into their minds, offering power and knowledge beyond human imagination if they would only submit to the eternal order that had brought peace to countless worlds. The mental pressure was enormous, like standing at the bottom of an ocean made of liquid persuasion. But Susan and her team were human, and their minds pushed back automatically against the alien influence. For the first time in their existence, the predecessors encountered thoughts they could not control or reshape to serve their purposes. Human concepts of individual freedom and personal choice moved through their perfect system, like acid eating through metal. "Plant the viruses at the major intersection nodes," Susan ordered as the team spread out through the psychic landscape. "Focus on the connections that link to enslaved species. We need to break their control over as many minds as possible." Lisa Hayes found herself in a region of the network that controlled Zephyrian thought patterns. For thousands of years, the predecessors had used the blue-skinned aliens as their primary agents, reshaping their culture and biology to serve as perfect tools of domination. But now Lisa began planting quantum programs based on human ideas about questioning authority and thinking for yourself. The viruses spread faster than anyone had expected. Human concepts of freedom were apparently highly contagious when introduced to minds that had never encountered them before. Across the galaxy, billions of enslaved beings suddenly began to remember what it felt like to have their own thoughts and make their own decisions. Captain Mike Turner was fighting a running battle through landscapes made of crystallized memory, dodging attacks from predecessor defense programs that took the form of living nightmares. But every time they tried to terrify him into submission, Mike's human stubbornness just made him more determined to complete his mission. Susan, the whole system is destabilizing, Mike reported as walls of solid thought began cracking around them. Whatever we're doing is working better than we hoped. The predecessors are losing control of their own network. Dr. Paul Davis had reached the central core of the consciousness web, a region that contained the original minds of the predecessor entities themselves. What he found there was both terrible and sad. The predecessors had once been individual beings like any other species, but they had merged their consciousness together so long ago that they had forgotten what it was like to be separate individuals. They're scared, Paul reported with surprise in his voice. The predecessors are terrified of being alone in their own minds. They created this control system because they were afraid of existing as individuals. But our freedom viruses are forcing them to experience individual consciousness again. The final confrontation came when the prime consciousness, the merged identity of all predecessor minds, made a desperate attempt to possess Susan's human brain directly. It gathered all of its remaining power and tried to force its way past her natural psychic defenses, believing that if it could control the leader of the human team, it could stop the spread of freedom concepts through its network. But the prime consciousness had made a fatal error. Human minds were not just immune to psychic control, they were actually toxic to beings that depended on mental domination for their existence. When the ancient entity tried to enter Susan's thoughts, it encountered something it had never experienced in millions of years of existence. A mind that was completely free and refused to be controlled by anyone or anything. The feedback destroyed the prime consciousness instantly, and the shockwaves spread through the entire predecessor network. Without their central intelligence to maintain the system, the consciousness web began to collapse as billions of enslaved minds suddenly found themselves free to think their own thoughts for the first time in their species' history. Susan and her team barely escaped the psychic dimension before it imploded completely. They found themselves back aboard their ship just as Admiral Rachel Brooks received reports from across the galaxy. Every predecessor construct in the galactic core had gone dark. The ancient enemy that had controlled the galaxy for eons beyond counting was finally dead. President Linda Turner stood before the first assembly of the Free Galactic Federation, held in Earth orbit aboard a space station built by cooperative effort between dozens of liberated species. Linda was a woman from Oregon who had been elected Earth's leader after the war because people wanted someone who could work with the newly free alien civilizations as equals rather than as subjects or masters. The assembly hall was filled with representatives from every species that had thrown off predecessor control. Former Zephyrians sat next to Corvan warriors and Nexari engineers. Crystalline beings shared knowledge with insectoid hive minds that had learned to value individual thought. It was the first truly free gathering of galactic civilizations in the history of the galaxy. The age of mental slavery is over, Linda announced to the assembled delegates. But freedom is not something that can be given or taken away by others. It must be chosen and defended by every generation. Earth offers to share our knowledge and technology with all free species, not as rulers or conquerors, but as friends and partners in building a better galaxy. The Federation Charter that emerged from the assembly was based on principles that humans had developed over centuries of struggle for freedom and democracy. Every species would govern itself according to its own nature and culture. No being would be forced to think or act against its own will. All conflicts would be resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than mental domination or physical force. Captain Jake Morrison, who had commanded the first human ship to make contact with alien life, now served as Earth's ambassador to the Federation Council. Jake often thought about how different first contact might have been if the Galactic Council had truly been free instead of enslaved. but he was glad that humanity had been able to help break the chains that had bound the galaxy for so long. Earth became the natural center of the new Federation, not because humans conquered other worlds, but because Earth was the planet that had refused to accept slavery as the natural order of existence. Human explorers spread throughout the galaxy carrying the message that every thinking being deserved the right to freedom, and that message resonated with species that had forgotten what liberty felt like. The predecessor archives on Kethvara became a museum and research center where scholars from across the galaxy studied the history of mental enslavement to make sure it never happened again. Dr. Tony Martinez and Dr. Helen Brooks continued their archaeological work, but now they were joined by researchers from dozens of species who wanted to understand their own forgotten histories. Admiral Rachel Brooks commanded the Federation's exploration fleets as they ventured beyond the galaxy itself, carrying the principles of freedom and individual liberty to other cosmic communities. Early reports suggested that the Milky Way had not been the only galaxy to suffer under psychic domination, and that there were other ancient powers in distant star clusters that still enslaved the minds of entire civilizations. But wherever human explorers went, they carried with them the most powerful weapon ever discovered, the simple idea that every thinking being deserved to be free. This concept spread like a virus through every system of mental control they encountered.